So while I'm laying out the parts for bag number 4 for the rear transmission case, I'm going to touch on some things I didn't mention on the first video for bags 1 through 3. That is to say that I'm impressed with the quality of the materials and the fit and finish of the parts that require tight tolerances. As an example, the diffs called for satellite washers over the outdrive shaft as it comes through the diff case, and bevel washers behind the beveled gears. While that is not new or uncommon on diffs on previous builds that I have done, I will say again the tolerances are tight and the diffs feel solid but smooth and not bound up and tight as new diffs with these types of components have felt to me in the past. I also noticed attention to details on components such as the laser etched teeth count on the gears, WIRC branding, and even part numbers etched or imprinted on some of the parts. Those are things that to me illustrate the design was carefully planned and quality control is a key factor. You might be thinking other brands have those same features, and yeah, I agree. But take it from a guy who has built many kits for many brands over the years. These types of features on the parts, while present on other brands, just give off the vibe quality when you inspect and handle them on the WIRC kit. These are things that some might say don't make a kit good or competitive and are features that are nice to haves, not necessarily must-haves. But in my humble opinion, 8-scale RC racing is not the cheapest, so for what we as consumers pay for the kits, components, and spares, the best possible finished product goes a long way. What is it that they say? You get what you pay for? And this kit so far seems to be delivering just that. So on to bag 4 and the assembly of the rear transmission case. So laying out the parts didn't take long, and I get right into cleaning up the parts with some brake cleaner. As many of you know already, any parts that will come in contact with or require thread locker should be clear of impurities and has been a general practice in RC as far back as I can remember. Some of the parts come from the factory with a generous amount of lubrication left over from manufacturing, and I just like cleaning them up in general anyway. So when it comes time for me to grease them up after assembly, there's a reduced chance something I didn't see or notice be a cause of premature wear or failure. Overkill? Maybe. Cheap insurance? Definitely. So once I spray the parts down, I'll dry them with a lint-free rag, feeling for anything obvious. I use lint-free rags because if there is an imperfection on the part, like a nick or a scratch or a chip, the lint-free rag is going to snag on it anyway, and it's going to make me take notice and see what it is. I pressed the bearings into place, and one thing I did that was not in view was I make sure that the bearings spin freely with no bind. I'll go ahead and clean the grub screw with some brake cleaner and apply a small amount of blue thread locker. I like to work it into the threads a little bit and then thread the screw into the outdrive a little bit, and then I'll back it back out. Once I back it out, I'll apply a little bit more and then thread it back into the outdrive to make sure both sets of threads have a coating. When I say coating, I mean a small dab or drop will do. I line up the flat plane of the pinion with the location of the grub screw on the outdrive and push it until it stops. The outdrive will only slide onto the pinion as far as is needed, as it was machined with fit and finish in mind, meaning it was designed to install in the seat with the proper gap for the correct end play left over. Once I'm confident the grub screw is on the flat surface of the pinion, I'll grab the 2.5 and snug it up as tight as I can without breaking the tip of the driver. Once on, I clean up the thread locker that is pushed out under pressure with my rag. I don't use a lot of thread locker, and yet I still manage to have some to wipe off. I spin the assembly to make sure it spins free with no binding. The slightest bit of bind or if something doesn't feel right, loosen the grub screw and check everything. The thread locker will not set that quick anyway, so you have some time. Next step for me is going to be mating and aligning the CVA bone with the coupler, pin, and locking spring. I know the manual illustrates this part to be installed at the same time as the bearings and pinion into the diff case. I did it in a different order, but I did not see an issue doing it out of sequence. Installing the lock spring took longer than it should, but I was trying to find the easiest, most efficient way and less likely to cause frustration if I had to do it in a rush. It's all fun and games doing this in the garage, but it's a different matter doing this at the last minute in a time crunch in the pits. The locking spring is like a keyring, I could say, smaller and coiled more tightly, but installing it is kind of the same principle as adding a key to the ring. In the end, I started at one end of the lock spring and applied pressure against the lip on the outdrive to get the bolt threading motion to get started, and just turned it counterclockwise until the other end of the ring snapped up onto the outdrive. This is a task definitely made easier with those opposable thumbs of ours. Once on, the pressure the lock spring applies is more than enough to keep the pin, coupler, and CVA mated, free to move and articulate freely. So the final step for bag 4 is completing the assembly of the rear transmission that include the rear body mount and rear shock tower. One thing I know I might get some grief on is the fact that I'm using a hammer on the outdrive. I'm literally tapping the diff lightly so that it shifts enough to allow the shims to fully seat properly on both sides of the case. It sounds silly, but it has worked in the past on previous builds. The recesses molded into the diff case make for a tight fit when you seat it with bearings and shims, but it is a smooth fit nonetheless with no binding or misalignment. I want to assemble this kit with 2 shims on each side as the manual illustrates. One thing I've learned lately is that gear mesh makes a difference more so than I ever care to believe or admit. I tried it with 2 shims on the ring gear side and 1 on the non-gear side. I mocked it up and there was just a little too much play, more than I'm used to or prefer on my diff assemblies. Once I was comfortable with the final fit and feel of all 4 shims in place, I spin the diff to ensure there is zero bind. It was butter smooth and felt good. You will also notice that I inserted the diff into the inspection cover of the rear diff housing first and then will mate it up to the housing where the pinion is already installed. This does not work on all diffs, but on the WIRC kit, it was a better way to do it, at least for me. So one more inspection and spin of the assembly before I go in to mate both halves together. The 2 parts come together effortlessly but snap into place with a firm click that for some reason in the RC world is so satisfying. I will say it again, quality does make a sound and I heard it when I put those parts together. Once together, I spin the assembly using the driveline to feel for any binding, listen for any skipping, and I check the lateral end play for the diff. There is maybe a tiny bit of play, but just the right amount based on what I normally like for a Nitro Buggy. So now I'm test fitting the aluminum rear shock tower, and I know that a carbon fiber upgrade is available. I might try it at some point, but right now I want to break the car into factory parts first, get baseline laps before making upgrades or trying to lighten up the car. I also noticed straight away that on the manual it illustrates that the WRC logo should be facing the back of the car. The many images I've seen of the shock tower have the logo facing the front. In the end, the shock tower doesn't have any resources or any indentations that would mandate it go on one way versus the other. So I stayed with what the manual illustrates and mounted it with the logo facing the back. I used my electric driver to get the button heads on quick, making sure I check the torque setting on the chuck before I start so there's no chance of over tightening the screw and stripping out the plastic. Ask me how I know. I learned the hard way. I thread them until I start to see them bottoming out, and then I stop so I can hand tighten them once I'm done. Now I'll install the rear body mount, and I appreciate the fact that it's keyed to make sure that there's a good mating surface of the shock tower, and again, make sure I don't over tighten the screw. The rear transmission back 4 is complete, and I'll inspect the assembly and look it over one more time. The manual also illustrates that you should grease the ring gear, but I will do that when I'm about to mount the front and rear clip of the car to the chassis. The grease always makes a mess and gets all over the place no matter what. So the build's going really smooth so far, and it's starting to look like a race car. So on to bag 5, which is the front transmission case. So bag 5, or the front transmission case assembly, is pretty much a repeat of bag 4, minus the install of the shock tower. The front shock tower goes on in a later step. Bag 5 went smooth and nothing really to point out, so I will speed through it and get to bag 6. So bag 6 is where things really start to get interesting. The suspension components really start to come together, and I start to get a real sense of where I'm going to have to inspect and maintain the car to ensure that it will remain consistent but durable as well. So first things first, I lay out the parts and get ready to assemble the front end. The kit includes a wide variety of pill options and toe shim thicknesses to fine-tune the car and the suspension for the track conditions and your driving style. There are also several options as far as the tensile strength of the arms is concerned. The kit includes the soft arms, but there are optional part numbers for medium and hard arms as well. I start the assembly of the front end by installing the droop screws into the arms. I'm not too concerned with getting the droop exactly where it should be for the first run at the track just yet. I will prep the car at the track prior to running the first laps. For that, I will reference an online setup sheet for the baseline spec. You can find the setup sheets along with case parts and merch online at wicracing.com. Next, I move on to locating and trimming the required pills off the tree mold for the arm position specified in the manual. The kit illustrates the lower arm position of the center or neutral on the A block and up on the B block. I will say, if you don't have a pair of flash cutters, I would suggest you get a pair of quality cutters for your pit box. Flash cutters clip the flashing off the tree mold clean, minimizing or eliminating the need to trim the part afterwards. Getting the pills into the blocks is easy, as the recesses are machined into the blocks in such a way that they only go in correctly one way. You would have to really try to get them in wrong, but you would know that they don't fit way before you could ruin the pill. Once I find and trim the pills I need for the assembly, I go ahead and just trim the rest from the tree. I can't help the OCD in me, but I always maintain that being organized really helps when it comes time to make a change to the car or help a fellow racer in need by not having to fumble around in my parts bins looking for what he or she may need. Just ask any one of my teammates, someone that knows me at the track, or anyone that has pitted with me before if I don't know where a tool or part is in my bag. I will usually know instantly if I have what you need or didn't bring it. I go ahead and install the pills and move on to mating the front diff assembly, hinge pins, lower arms, and securing it all with the A and B blocks. As I start to get the diff and blocks ready, I'm also going to check the amount of play between the hinge pins and the bores in the arms that they pass through to connect to the block on the other side. On previous builds, I've experienced minimal to zero play in this area and the pin's not moving at all. Now, whether that was by design or not, I can't say, but given all of the other content that I've seen on the subject regarding setups and handling, the practice of not letting the suspension have a place to bind up or have a point where the force is put on the suspension under jumps, cornering, on and off power, and hard acceleration, having the arms with a little bit of play was a desired tuning option, especially on track conditions that we experience on the West Coast. I remember watching my son race during one of his qualifiers and the car traction rolling or outright flipping over while cornering while he was getting back into the throttle. Now, there are a number of factors that contribute to that effect, but I know that one of the first things I did was check the suspension for binding and the position of the arms on the block by way of the pills. Upon disassembling the suspension, I went to remove the hinge pins to check if they were bent, and remember having to push them out with the other side or tug on them with the tool to get them free of the arm. That made me want to start there. I found a drill bit that was, I want to say, maybe a millimeter or so larger than the bore in the arm, and got my drill, put it at half speed, and I reamed the bores a bit carefully and then cleaned and polished the hinge pins, and they felt so much more free. I reassembled, checked, and repeated the same process again on the rear. I didn't want to take really large swings at the issue just yet. I told my son to check the suspension and didn't see anything wrong and told him to drive it the same way. The second qualifier was much smoother, faster, and the car was definitely more point and shoot, which was pretty good setup for that track. I didn't want my son to know what I did and what we were going to try because I didn't want him to change his approach on driving style just yet. I wanted him to send it the way it was. Sorry if I went on a tangent, but I felt it was worth noting that when I checked it on this kit, the hinge pins moved through the bores in the arms effortlessly. We will see how this affects handling on this car. This is my first pillowable car build, and I expect a certain learning curve to come with it. Here I am mocking up the entire assembly with different shims in place. That is one thing I wish the manual did specify, but I know that I can find this on a factory spec sheet, but still, a baseline would have been nice. Similar to how they provide the pin position and which pill to install off rip. I ended up going with the 1mm stacked with the 0.5mm, and the range of motion felt really good and smooth with the arms articulating well. I know this could change when I install and tighten the screws, and will adjust it if need be. I tightened it all the way down and noticed that the driver's side arm is hanging up, whereas the passenger side arm is free. I check and I notice that the M3 screw on the driver's side is torqued down a bit more than the passenger side, and once I adjust it, they are both equal. That is definitely important to check and maintain. The suspension needs to articulate through the whole range of motion equally. Any inconsistency there and your car end result will be just that, inconsistent, and you might spend your whole run constantly having to compensate for it with excessive transmitter inputs. Well, that is it for bag 6, and the front clip is so close to being complete. All in all, the fit and finish remain on point and materials feel solid. The next video will cover bags 7 through 11, which will complete the assembly of the front and rear clip. I feel I'm getting close to the home stretch, and I can see it coming together really well. And this thing will be brapping at our home track's Thunder Rally for some club racing or at the dirt for some Friday night lights in no time. Thanks again for sticking with us, and we invite you to like, comment, and subscribe, and activate your notifications. Reach out to us at our page email address as well, wircwestcoast@gmail.com. We have other videos in the works, such as the Nitro Truggy build and an introduction to our team members and a general overview of what we have planned for this team and the channel. Take care, and of course, no WIRC episode will be complete without my attempt to learn and speak Italian by association. And if you're Italian, I'm sorry if I'm butchering the phrase or pronunciation. So here it goes. We thank you for tuning in, and fino alla prossima volta.